What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you this morning?
Doing good. I'm excited about this podcast because it's what we're talking about is kind of analogous to gut health, really, human
Yeah,
gut health. It's funny, we're talking about soil health here with this podcast, and we're talking about how to make your garden grow or how to make your lawn grow and doing it in such a way that doesn't inhibit the normal, kind of flora within the soil or within the lawn or garden. Same goes for the gut, the health of your gut, right?
yeah,
So we want to make sure that we have plenty of good microbes in our gut to keep us healthy. And as the old saying with naturopathic physicians is, when all else fails, treat the gut, make sure the gut is healthy. And then the other thing is, in Chinese medicine, this is pretty funny. The stomach element is considered earth, which is analogous to the soil. So making sure that the soil of the human body, so to speak, is healthy. So we're going to talk about real soil, and we're going to talk about like getting your hands dirty, and if you want to plant stuff, just giving a basic breakdown of how to do it, because I've made tons of mistakes with what I've done around my house and in planting trees. It's as simple as, I mean, really, my ignorance was, okay, well, you have something, let's stick it in the ground and put soil in it and it should grow, right? And then water it. Like that was what I
that's kind of
thought.
where I'm at, Keoni. So I'm excited for
Okay.
this one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's and sometimes it will grow. I mean, if you get like a hardy plant, sometimes it will grow, or if you get it into the right soil condition, but a lot of times it won't, just because you have no idea what you are doing.
Yeah,
Another mistake that I've made is with gardening is, basically going into a garden and pulling all the weeds and rototilling and turning the soil and
yeah,
so on and so on. And that is just not the right thing to do. You're just totally ruining the soil microbiome there, which, and if you do that, things are going to be hard to grow. And this is something that everybody thinks is right. I mean, I think that our founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they actually would tell the farmers in America or propagated the idea that you have to turn the soil, so to
yeah.
speak, to help aerate it. But the soil actually has a natural air rating, um, I don't know, kind of element to it if you leave it to its own processes and let it do what it needs to do. Now you can help it along. So that's what we're going to talk about
Awesome.
today for the most part. So a few things that I think are good for a beginning gardener, to kind of understand, and you can get test kits for this. You can actually send a lot of this stuff off to like your local agricultural group or society or state agricultural group. And, it's very good to know the soil pH. That tells you a lot about what's going to grow in the soil. It's very good to know about how the soil drains, the porosity of the soil. It's very important to know what's called the NPK number of the soil. That's the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium content of the soil.
Mm.
This will tell you how you can fertilize it or should fertilize it. It's very important to know about the microbes in your soil, the fungal elements in your soil, the animals, the climate, and then also something called the cation exchange capacity. And the cation exchange capacity, all we really need to know with that without going into detail is that when you get your soil tested, the higher the number, the more nutrients the soil will hold, which means the more fertile the soil will be.
Okay.
All
And
right.
all that's easily testable.
All that is easily testable. There's actually kits you can get at like Lowe's. You could send off soil samples, like here in North Carolina. You can send them off to, gosh, I think NC State University, the state university, tests all of that for you, the agricultural part of that.
Yeah.
But I think every county has something like that, especially as if you're a farmer. I mean, this is really good.
Hmm.
But this is really important for just if you have a little soil around your house and you want to grow certain plants and beautify it, or have like a home food garden or something like that, and which is what I do. And I have very, very little soil around my property. My house just takes up all the property. I think I live in downtown. We're very close together, but I do have a little bit of soil that we have kind of brought back to health over the years of being here. And now it's like a little forest oasis we have here. It's really, really beautiful. And right now I have this huge fig tree that's coming in that is just, I've never seen a fig tree so happy. I mean, it's huge, and we get like hundreds, I'd say thousands of figs coming off. We have to give the stuff away. And then beautiful blueberry bushes, passion flower vines. We're actually even on the side of our house growing, and they're taking off this year, our kiwi vines. So
Wow.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's neat. It's really neat when you get your hands in the soil and stuff.
But it didn't start that way, Keoni?
No, it was actually our soil. Our soil around here, when we got into it, was filled with trash. We had to pick it up. I mean, we bought a house back in 2006. Not at the time, wasn't really in the best part of town. Now it's like really coming along here. And then we just beautified it, and using compost, which we'll talk about here, we just basically treated the soil. And now what we see is we have all kinds of wildlife and arthropods in the soil, insects, lots of birds
cats.
now. Oh yeah, neighborhood cats. Yeah, we get one of those every a stray cat every season. Every spring we get another one. It's funny. Before I got on the podcast, we were just talking about driving some of these cats up to Massachusetts to a woman who's going to take them. So, okay. But yeah, they know about Jillian. Obviously, the word gets around downtown in the cat community to come hang out with Jillian, because she will feed them and take care of all of them. But anyway, so let's just go through like the real quick, the microbes of the soil and what they do. And I want to bring this up because a lot of times what people do, they think they're really enhancing their garden by spraying like pesticides and herbicides and stuff like that on their soil, where they can just do very simple things to get rid of, to enhance the soil and make it better, make it grow, and to help balance populations out of bacteria that may not be so good, or fungal elements that may not be so good. And you can just do it by natural means. So anytime you spray pesticides or fungicides or anything like that on there, and sometimes this stuff is necessary, but anytime you do that, you're ruining the balance of the microbiome in the soil.
Right. So
one of the biggest elements of the soil, because they feed a lot of the other elements, is bacteria. And bacteria are very important because they're the Earth's primary decomposers. The other thing about them is they are a main source for protozoa, main food source. Protozoa love bacteria. You want to have protozoa in your soil. They actually have symbiotic relationships with roots. Many of them feed off the root exudates. And so populations hang near root balls, or what's called the rhizosphere, the area around the root. There are two main types, the anaerobes and aerobes. One thing about compost is not ready if it smells awful, right? Because that means that you have a higher percentage of anaerobic bacteria. This is one of the reasons why when you have a compost pile, you want to make sure that you turn it periodically to make sure that it gets aerated. And compost, when it's ready, which should take really just a few months if you're turning it over and over periodically, it should have a nice soil smell to it and should not smell stinky. If it does, then you have too much anaerobic bacteria in there. But anyway, so in the soil you have anaerobes and aerobes. Anaerobes can function in an environment without oxygen. Aerobes, as the name implies, function in an environment with oxygen. That's why you turn the soil. So you want to make sure your compost has a lot of aerobic bacteria in it. So
now, do you have a compost site on your property, Keoni?
Yep. It's a little drum. It's not ideal, but it's a little drum that we just fill up with vegetable matter as we get it and just throw it in there. And I mean, man, we have 2 years worth of vegetable, scraps and stuff in there. And in your compost, you just want to make sure that you are not adding like meat scraps and stuff to it, because that's just going to propagate the anaerobic bacteria. it's going to mess with the microbiome of that. It's best to put that in like a separate pile, but you just want to use like vegetable scraps, grass clippings, leaves, things like that in there, and it will break down quickly.
Okay. And then you're spreading that compost. Is that correct?
You can, you can spread it. You can put it on areas of soil that, just you have a hard time growing stuff, or are, have been heavily sprayed or have been burned by lots of fertilizer, stuff like that. So basically you're inoculating the soil with good microbes using compost.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, bacteria, like I said, they're the main decomposers. So you really want to have, lots of good bacteria in your soil. They tend to be really good at breaking down like cellulose. They're not so great in breaking down lignins. Lignins are things that are very high in bark and woody type materials. And the other microbe that does this really well is the fungi, or the fungi. And they basically will break that stuff down. So if your soil gets too dry, the bacteria can't do their job, just because they will tend to go dormant, right? The other thing about bacteria, which is very good, is they help fix nitrogen, so that plants, they take inert nitrogen from the atmosphere, and they basically, through biochemical processes, change it so that plants can use it as nutrients, right? They help recycle CO2 and sulfur. They just help the plants grow better. So there's this really neat symbiotic relationship with them.
Yeah.
It's very, go ahead.
You can see how with like a pesticide or anything like that, where we're intervening, and it's not necessarily the best.
No,
this balance.
No, it's not. And it's unfortunate that we kind of got into that. I think for the small gardener, or somebody who has like, a few acres of land to plant stuff, I really think you want to get away from using a lot of the industrialized stuff. I mean, maybe for like big agricultural farming, it may be appropriate, but even then, it's not great. But how much good compost can you create? Like, right. I don't know what really would be inhibiting like large agricultural scaling factory models to use some of these things. I think they're limited by compost and things like that, where they have to use these other soil enhancers, and they have to use a lot of these fungicides and insecticides. And I hate the word "have to use," because there's always an end around where you can get around that and use something more natural,
Yeah.
And I think we're slowly moving that way, as we know more about soil science. And you think we would know a whole lot about soil science, but gosh, I think within the last 20 years, we just found a whole new kingdom of bacteria. Like they're not even called bacteria; they're called archaea, and they're pretty amazing too. They're definitely decomposers, but they actually reside in our guts. They reside in the guts of like cows. They're the ones who help break down and decompose material and actually cause methane. They create methane in the guts of cows and things like that. They are also what are known as the extremophiles. So scientists have found these bacteria like in volcanic pits at these very high, sulfur containing pools that you would think nothing could live in there, but these bacteria can reside in there. So it's pretty amazing. And also they may have this new archaea. They're not bacteria. They're actually in a whole new kingdom unto themselves. But this new archaea, we may be able to also develop a lot of pretty impressive antibiotics from them. So they're pretty neat. But they're also in our soil. And they also help, like bacteria, help fix nitrogen for plants.
It's fascinating to think what more we're missing.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. The other thing, I just want to go over this real quick, because it took me a while to get and understand. But after bacteria, so bacteria are very important in soil. After they're eaten by like other microorganisms or smaller organisms like what are called nematodes or protozoa, ammonium is released into the soil as a waste product, which then gets converted into nitrites and then into nitrates. And this is how another way that plants will utilize the microbiome to get food. So basically it helps convert inert nitrogen and into forms of nitrogen that could be used by plants.
Yeah. So they create more usable food.
Yeah. One of the most important food microbiome, soil animals, so to speak, or fungi, and they're not really considered animals. They're actually a kingdom unto themselves. Are fungi, and they are also primary decayers of the soil food web. They can digest just about anything. Barks of trees, lignins, things called chitins. These are like the arthropod skins of animals. Chitin, you see them in like shrimp shells and things like that. Bones, they help break down rock, etc. And when you break down rock over time, that becomes part of the soil. Again, fungi help to release what's ammonium ion, and then bacteria can convert it to nitrate. And based on those, certain plants prefer ammonium ion, certain plants prevent like nitrates. And so knowing what your soil is, it more bacterial dominant or has more fungi in it, then you will know what plants will do better in that. And if you don't want those plants, you can always, based on how you use compost or mulch or anything like that, you can basically change the proportions of bacteria and fungi. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And I think you got a hint on that, right? When I said like fungi, like really like lignins, like bark.
Right.
So think about mulch. If you lay down mulch on the ground, fungi like that. If you lay down what we call brown mulch, like leaves and bark, things that bacteria have a harder time breaking down, fungal elements dominate. Yeah, you're inviting them. If you put like green mulch in there, we're talking about grass clippings and vegetable matter and stuff like that, then you get more of a bacterial dominance in there. But you really want both.
Yeah.
But it's good to know based on what you tend to be planting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So fungally dominated soils have more ammonium in it. Okay, so that will help tell you about what plants grow there. And it's very interesting to know, like, trees, for example, really tend to, and I say tend to, really like fungally dominated soils. And so that tells you something. So if you're planting
trees, bark, kind of.
Right. And it also tells you, like, if you think about what grows around trees, like under the canopy of a tree, you don't get a whole lot of grass or anything like that, and so the soil is very different as far as the nitrate, the type of nitrogen in that soil compared to outside that. So one of the reasons why you probably don't want to, besides sunlight being an issue, you probably don't want to grow a garden under a tree, What else? One of the things that is very important when we are talking about soil is with the fungal elements. You really can mess that up big time by compacting soil and by rototilling. You just break it up. You break up all these what we call the mycorrhizomes, the kind of the fungi, like, set out these like real thin shoots all over the soil and stuff. And if you're rototilling them, you just break that up, and then there's no communication with the trees or other plants. And those things act like basically like a soil internet for all the life around it. The fungi act like that. These are like little small microscopic cables that go all over the soil. And if you're breaking that up, you can't bring nutrients back to plants or trees. Trees can't talk to one another, which they actually do. Like, trees can talk to one another through these fungal elements by, for example, if insects are attacking one tree, it will tell a tree close by that I'm getting attacked by this insect, and therefore start secreting this you start building up certain components of your immune system to help fight it off. So it's really fascinating the way fungi help the natural world. And that's not to say like there's good fungi, there's bad fungi. So this is another reason, just like there's good bacteria and bad bacteria, but you want them in certain proportions to keep the soil healthy. So a lot of fungal diseases of plants can be mitigated by making sure that you have good, healthy soil there. And so it will stop you from spraying stuff all over the place, to help kill it. Because over time, you're just doing more damage.
Yeah.
You may take care of the problem short term, but over time, you're doing more damage to the actual soil.
It's fascinating to think. I've only seen, like, most of my gardening experiences, someone in my family rototilling the hell out of the dirt. Right. They're just doing a hurricane fungi network massacre down there.
That's what they're doing. Yeah, they're just basically doing a nuclear bomb, like, killing everything in the soil, cutting up earthworms, cutting up everything in there. Yeah. That is just a problem. Anyway, there are other things. We talked about protozoa. Protozoa love bacteria, so they eat bacteria, so they help control the populations of bacteria in the soil. 80% of the nitrogen a plant needs comes from the waste produced by bacteria and fungi eating protozoa. So the protozoa eat both fungi and bacteria, so you want protozoa there. They also help break up organic matter into smaller particles, and then this acts as more food for the bacteria. So it's a nice symbiotic cycle between bacteria and protozoa. Another microbe you want in your soil are what are called nematodes, and these are non-segmented, like blind roundworms. I'm pretty sure you can see these with the naked eye. Like protozoa, they help mineralize nutrients contained in bacteria and fungi. So they eat bacteria and fungi and help change the nutrients in there so that plants can take them up. So, and the other thing is nematodes act like bacteria and even fungi may not move as fast as nematodes through the soil. And so they act like a bus transport to transport bacteria from whatever. So the bacteria will latch onto them, and these nematodes, go through the soil and move them to another area of soil, and then help make that area of the soil better. Nematodes help make the soil more porous, but they also require porous soil. So if you compact your soil down, if you constantly have like stuff going over the soil, like roads or on pathways and stuff, you're just not going to be able to grow stuff. And we know this intuitively, right? If you ever go hiking and paths, well-worn paths, nothing will grow on those because they're constantly being compacted.
Yeah.
Another big important component of soil are what called arthropods, and these are basically just insects. So just think insects, flies, beetles, spiders. Around 3/4 of all living organisms are arthropods, which is amazing to me.
Wow.
And an arthropod range from the huge Alaskan king crabs to tiny mites, soil mites. And basically what they do is they shred up organic matter, right? So they break up leaf matter, they make it smaller so that bacteria can go to work on them. They do this to both dead and alive material. So it's very important to have a good insect population in and around your garden to help the flora there and the fauna there be balanced.
Yeah. Are you a fan of eating crab, Keoni?
I do like it. I mean,
me too.
Definitely. It's good, definitely good. But basically, you are eating overgrown insects. That's basically what they are.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the biggest indicators of healthy soil is really just go out and take a scoop of your soil. And if you find earthworms in there, you probably have a pretty healthy soil.
Okay.
Earthworms are the #1 indicator of having healthy soil. If you don't have them in there, you need to go to work on composting and getting them there. 1 acre of good garden soil contains around 2 to 3 million earthworms, which is fascinating to me. The other day, I was out by my clinic in Reynolda Village, and I was just watching this robin, hopping through the grass there. And every time he hopped, he'd pick up a worm. He had like 20 worms in his mouth.
Yeah.
And it took him like 6 or 7 seconds. So that tells me basically that whoever does the lawn there doesn't spray it or doesn't heavily spray it, at least, because there are tons of earthworms in there.
which is great. Earthworms secrete what are called vermicastings. These are basically worm poop, basically. And what they do is they increase the cation exchange capacity of the soil. All right. So basically, the higher the cation exchange capacity of the soil, the more nutrients are in the soil. One of the reasons why worms are very important. They primarily will eat bacteria, but they also use bacteria in their guts to help break things down. And they are very, very important for aerating the soil. I mean, they create tons of tunnels through the soil, and therefore this helps with aeration.
Yeah, there's your natural rototilling without the destruction.
Right, absolutely, that's right, that natural rototilling. And then we have what are called gastropods, which are like your slugs and snails. You don't want too many of these, but you do want some. You want to balance them. They shred up leaf matter and things like that. They're good to have in there. And then you have what are called, the animals, reptiles, mammals, birds especially. A lot of these, the moles and things like that. Again, these can create water reservoirs in the soil and stuff like that. You don't want to go to town killing these things. They create a healthy, soil web, the flora and fauna there. They help aerate. They act like microbial taxi cabs, especially robins, right, with the worms and stuff. So and then they also help, all these things really help disperse seeds and things like that.
So you want a robust animal kingdom there.
You do, and it's fascinating. So I live downtown, and it's just fascinating what we have going on here. We get all the comments around our neighborhood, like, wow, I love what you have going on.
Keoni's jungle.
It's with the little bit of property we have like a little jungle around, and then we also, part of that jungle is we have, we grow a lot of our own, fruit and food, vegetables, which are great. So, all right, so I wanted to just go through that and just talk briefly about the microbes in the soil and, the flora and fauna of keeping healthy soil. But let's just talk about like some techniques for organic gardening and landscaping. And
all right, I got my notepad out.
All right, let's do it. All right, so we already said that some plants prefer soils dominated by fungi. So you're just gonna have to know what that is. I think trees primarily really like fungally dominated soils. So that says something there. And then soils, other soil types, or other plants prefer soils dominated by bacteria. As far as pH go, alkaline soils are primarily bacterial dominated, and acidic soils are primarily fungally dominated. And I bring that up because it's real easy to test your soil pH. You can just go get a pH meter at like Lowe's or some plant shop and test that, or you can send it off. So most vegetables, annuals, do you know what an annual is, Brian?
I do not.
What that word means? Okay, so annuals are just basically plants that, do a complete growth cycle in a year. So, once you plant them, they do their complete growth cycle in a year, and they die off. So we're talking about certain flowers, things like that.
Okay, so not like a apple tree or something that survives.
Right. So most vegetables, annuals, and grasses prefer nitrogen in the nitrate form and do best in bacterial-dominated soils. All right. And then most trees, shrubs, and perennials. So what are perennials? So perennials are basically plants that take more than 2 years to go through their complete growth cycle. More than 2 years. So as opposed to a biennial. Okay. So that's a 2 year to go through its full growth cycle.
Right. Are you like sectioning off portions of your property, Keoni, to kind of meet the needs of, like, for instance, like vegetables, like you're saying, better nitrogen in bacterial dominated soils? Are you kind of clumping those together, or how do you go about, I guess, using this information for your
so basically
property?
It's real easy. I basically do it with we do some testing, but like with the pH testing stuff, but basically it's with the mulch.
Okay.
Right. So basically using green mulch, right? So think of grass clippings, vegetable matter, things like that, to enhance the soil, to bring on more bacteria. And then brown mulches,
like barks and things like that, leaf matter and stuff like that, to bring on more fungally dominated soils.
Okay. And at any point during the process when you were starting Keoni, did you use those, those nice industrial soils with the white balls in them and things like that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and I'm hoping that's one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, is to get people away from that,
Right. So
because there's a lot that you can do without doing that. And, the other thing about it is, industrialized nitrates and stuff like that, over time, it just ruins the soil. It may enhance it in the short term, but over time it ruins the soil. And then a lot of that leaches away and gets into the waterways, and then causes eutrophication, which basically takes all the oxygen out of water, and you'll get these fish kills and everything else, and you see this really, really big time with big farming complexes that use these, different nitrates and herbicides and pesticides and stuff like that. So yeah, we want to, especially on this scale, we want to try to get away from that. And it's easy to do that.
And now at this point, not using any of that stuff. Is that correct?
No, yeah. Trying not to. Yeah, absolutely. So compost, compost can be used to inoculate beneficial microbes and life in the soils around your yard, introduce, maintain, or alter the soil food web in a particular area. So you can play with your compost. Let's see. And we just talked about that, like brown organic materials support fungi, fresh green organic materials support bacteria.
Yeah.
All right. Mulch laid on the surface tends to support fungi, and mulch worked into the soil tends to support bacteria. Okay. And if you break up that mulch in smaller pieces, it's going to tend to support more bacteria. If you wet it and grind it thoroughly, again, supports bacterial colonization. So coarser, drier mulches support fungal activity.
Mm.
One of the things to help feed the soil or help feed the grasses and stuff, you can actually feed like grasses using like soybean meal, bone meal, things like that. Soybean or corn meal, stuff like that will help feed the microbes in the soil to help the plants grow better. So that's one. Those are some things you can do. So the sugars in those foods help bacteria multiply and grow. If you're trying to bring on more bacteria into your soil. Composting, you can definitely, based on how you compost, cause a higher proportion of bacteria or higher portions of fungi right. in there. So based on how you compost. And one really good thing is what's called compost teas. Compost teas are taking like regular compost and then basically aerating the compost with water. Make sure your water is not chlorinated because it will kill the bacteria in the compost tea. And it's a really good spray to add. And there are big like kits that you can make compost teas out of that you can get at like plant stores and stuff, and you can spray this on the soil, and you're talking about a soup full of microbes, and you can spray it on the leaves and stuff like that. And some of this is medicine for the plants, actually could help prevent bacterial infections in the plant or fungal infections in the plant too.
Wow.
So compost teas are pretty amazing what they can do.
Yeah, it seems like they create a healthy diet for the area.
And like we were saying with the compost teas need to be aerated, right? Because if they're not, you're going to create a higher proportion of anaerobic bacteria, right? Which is going to create different, bad smells and things like that. And it shouldn't be. It should have a nice like soil, almost kind of like a refreshing smell if you aerate it enough. And it's going to be better for the soil. But keep in mind, any compost, like you do want to turn your compost. But if you just create a pile year after year after year, those initial layers of that compost are going to be pretty good as long as you have enough breakdown to put in your garden. But it's always best to turn them
the natural process will naturally aerate your compost pile, but it's going to take you a lot longer than a few months.
Right.
So you're probably going to want to use that. Like if you have a big compost pile, for it to break down completely, it may take a few years, and you don't want that. You want to get your compost and use it, out in your yard to make things grow better.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to bring up was there is actually something called Raizel Inoculum. I don't know if you guys can see this, but anyway, these are basically fungal elements that basically you can inoculate roots with that are not related to the plant, but work with the plant to make them healthier, and the root ball becomes more dense and healthier. So this is something that you can buy. This is fairly recent in plant science. So pure mycorrhizal inoculum, you can inoculate roots with this stuff, and this is a good natural way to help not only our fungal friends make plants grow, but also the plant. Lots of plants love this stuff, and there's nothing. This is completely natural.
Wow.
So think about it as a kind of like a probiotic for plants. What else should we talk about here? I'm trying to think.
I'm interested in potted plants. What kind of, because obviously you're not having that same connection to, I guess, the earth and the surrounding environment. So do you have any tips for maintaining those, or anything that you do differently with a potted plant specifically?
It's kind of the same thing. So you need to know, besides the basics, like knowing like how much water it needs and how much sunlight it needs. Sure. And stuff like that. You're going to want to know what, would these mycorrhizal inoculum elements help certain plants? Like for orchids, this type of thing can be very important. For certain plants, it can be very important. What else? How can you make sure that within that pot of soil there is a microbiome within that pot of soil that is going to keep the plant healthy? So how can you and every plant is going to be a little bit different, and some of it you probably won't have to do that much. And these are kind of what we call the hardy plants, where you don't really have to do too much to it, but you will have to, in a potted plant, you will have to feed it. And the other thing about it is, as the plant grows, you don't want that root ball or that root mass becoming constrained by the barrier of the pot. And so a lot of times you have to replant and stuff like that.
Okay. But you're still using these composts that we talked about being plant specific.
You could still use this stuff to help your plants, but on a much, much smaller scale. You can certainly use compost tea and stuff like that in those plants. Especially, I have a ton of potted plants outdoor, where it's not a problem using the compost on there. But yeah, compost teas you can use in both indoor and outdoor plants without much of a problem.
Okay.
As far as feeding them. Let's see. I think that is it. I wanted to talk about this. As far as like, if we want to remain natural with our soil health, we want to make sure that the additives we use don't have what are high NPK numbers, right? This is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium numbers. Farmers know this. You can go buy fertilizers with all this stuff. Anyway, so it's just a proportion of these three plants, the NPK number of these three nutrients. And you don't want to put anything on your lawn or really anything on the other plants that's much higher than 10-10-10. Okay. So organic fertilizers rarely exceed those numbers. So compost is not going to exceed that number.
Okay.
High phosphorus will kill off also the mycorrhizal fungi, which we really want in our, we really want that in our plants. We want to have that with a lot of it. And if you want to help feed your lawns or give them a good kind of fertilizer food, soybean meal is great, and it has an NPK number of 611. Alfalfa, blood meal, cottonseed meal, feather meal, fishbone meal, these things are much better than chemical spraying and stuff like that.
Do you have any tips for how you keep away things you don't necessarily want, Keoni? Like in your blueberry bushes, I know the birds are probably hitting those up pretty heavily, or insects and things like that. Specific insects.
Well, for me, I mean, if you have a really, like, for example, we have a few blueberry bushes that produce so much it doesn't matter.
You can
like
supply the neighborhood.
Yeah, we get a ton, and it's nice having the birds there. But what we have used before, like nets, so the birds can't actually get to them, that type of thing. So and then you also some of our trees, like peach trees and stuff like that, like the squirrels or the deer, not so much in my property downtown because we don't see a lot of deer, but my brother-in-law's place, they have a peach tree, and if they don't pick those peaches right before they're ripe, they are gone that night. Yeah. Because the deer just flood sometime in the evening, flood there and take everything that was produced.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to get to them before the animals get to them. But honestly, if you have we have this healthy fig tree that everything in the neighborhood feeds off of, including ourselves, and there's more than enough.
That's awesome.
So it's really, so it's really not a big problem. I understand, like, people have gardens and stuff where deer come in there and eat their fill or whatever, or you have squirrels or whatever, raccoons come in there. And usually I just use, on that scale, well, at least with some of my family members, and I've done this also, we just use barrier methods, try to do the best we can with that, or grow enough that
you can supply.
that they can't eat it all. So
anything else, Keoni?
So all this information basically came from this book. I want to give a shout out to these guys. This book's really great. It's called Teaming with Microbes, and they have a series of books. They have one called Teaming with Fungi, Teaming with Nutrients. Jeff Lowenfels and Wayne Lewis. So check this book out. That's what basically all this information comes from, and they talk about it in a much better way and lay it out in a much better way than me and you certainly did today in this podcast. But it is, I don't know, it's something to check out, especially if you're into getting your hands dirty, which I recommend everybody do.
Yeah. It definitely makes me happier when I have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, we as humans, we have this innate capacity to create things, and there's nothing more satisfying than creating a garden and growing your own plants and taking care, your own plants and stuff. I mean, it's really, really satisfying to do.
Yeah.
And you can do it really easily with natural means and with stuff that you have. Like everybody, eats fruits, or should eat fruits and vegetables, some more than others, but you're going to have food scraps that you can start today. Start creating a compost right now. Create a compost bin right now, or a compost pile.
How long did it take you?
I do it downtown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're definitely in the
heart of
downtown
area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did it take you guys to go from, kind of like you said, picking up trash off the land when you bought it to at least fruitful? Not necessarily the jungle level that it is now, but.
So you can create a very healthy soil, and even in industrialized poisoned soils, within a year or two. Okay. You can start, I mean, almost immediately, if you start a compost, you could start creating healthy soil as soon as you start applying that compost to the soil.
All right.
So you can certainly do that. You can, one way that you can also create healthy soil, this is a very simple way. Like if you're mowing your grass, let the grass clippings lay where they are. You don't need to pick them up. Now you can pick them up, but then add them to a compost pile.
Right.
But you can also leave them where they are to add food to the soil and break them up. Same with leaf litter. A lot of people will like rake up their leaves because they think it's unsightly and bag it up. But man, that stuff makes great compost. So you can leave it where it is, or you gather it up and you can create compost with it. And another thing I just want to tell people, there's go walk through a natural forest area. There's no fertilizer fairy out there spraying synthetic fertilizers. It's naturally done to create that forest, and as certain plants grow and become more dominant, you get different proportions of bacteria and fungal elements and stuff like that until you get what's called old growth forests eventually, which we don't have many here anymore, but those old growth forests, they are completely, there's a good proportion of bacteria, but they're fungally dominated. And those fungal elements connect to every tree out there, and they communicate that way. It's like the forest internet with these fungal elements and these, these filaments they shoot out to all the trees. This is the way they communicate and feed each other, and the way they talk to each other. So trees are not, just isolated organisms. I mean, if they connect, they talk to all the plants, and the plants talk to them, and the bacteria talk to them. They feed each other, and that's really what you want to do. You just want to make a good, a food web for your plants to keep them healthy. And it's wonderful to me because now in urban areas, certain areas, the green areas, lots of cities, I think Seattle is doing this, but lots of cities are creating what are called food forests. And if you do it right, you can create a lot of free food for a lot of people,
Yeah, just look at what you've done for the whole neighborhood, birds included.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the cats included too. So obviously the cats like hanging out. I'm thinking, well, I haven't seen any, but we must be, actually we do have some like voles and moles and things like that. I haven't seen any rats around, but the cats certainly they're good mousers, so they take care of that.
I wish I could insert the meow of that black cat that's always there, Keoni. It's like he's been smoking cigarettes for 20 years when he meows.
He's an old man. He lives out on my porch, and he's funny. He's my guard cat. I've had people come up there. There's this like diseased looking old cat out there that looks like he's gonna kill me, and like, no, he's very friendly. Yeah, it's funny. His name was Rambo. We changed his name to Rainbow to make him more inviting for people. But anyway.
Well, thank you for that education, Keoni. I'm excited to get started.
Well, check out the book, because this is the true education. But yeah.